Hello, my name's Christina. I'm an adventure queen, and today I'm going to be talking to you about my favourite way to get out and about, which is bikepacking. I'm going to start off by saying, firstly, I'm not an expert, but what I do hope to do is pass on some of the things I've learned over the last 3 or 4 years, which helped me to get out and about bikepacking for the first time, and inspire you to do the same. So I'm going to be covering choosing a bike, planning the first routes, and packing for your trip. But first of all, a little bit about me. I've always loved cycling. I used to cycle to college, then I spent a couple of years just commuting to work by bike across London. And about 3 years ago now, I started wondering about taking some longer trips. I was studying at the time for a master's degree, and I decided to combine a research trip with a holiday because, you know, when you haven't got much cash, it's good to get out there and spend as little money as possible. So I had no real idea what I was doing, but I packed up my bike and headed out to Salisbury. I went to visit Stonehenge because I'd never been there, which is a bit outrageous considering it's not that far away. And I also visited Bulford, the town which my surname is from, which again I'd never been to. I went to look for the Bulford kiwi, which is a big chalk kiwi engraved in a hill. Who knew? And then I also combined it with some theatre for my research trip. So, long story short, I loved it, and I carried on planning like little trips, and last month I got back from bikepacking the length of New Zealand on the Te Araroa, which, if you know the Te Araroa walking trail, is sort of the bike equivalent, which was sort of planned out by the Kennett brothers in 2016. It stretches about 3,000 kilometres from the north all the way to the south across both islands, and I completed it over 2 months before doing some other bits and pieces. So I learned a lot about that bikepacking on that trip, and I want to share some of that with you to help you get started on your own trips. So, what is bikepacking and why do it? So while cycle touring has been around as long as bikes, bikepacking is sort of a new term for a style of cycle touring where you travel as light as possible and you're typically going off-road. It's effectively the same kind of principles as going for a hike, but with your bike off the beaten track. Bikepacking.com describe it as being kind of a more punk rock version of cycle touring, by which I think they mean sort of getting back to basics, and yeah, it's modern, it's new, it's cool. As well as the cycling itself, bikepacking is great because you can go a lot further in a shorter amount of time. So if you were thinking of walking from a place to a place, obviously it's a lot quicker to go by bike, which means if you're short of time, it's a really good way to get out and see a larger area over a shorter space of time. There's also an amazing community of cyclists out there, so even if you're heading out on your own, it's actually a very social activity. You can meet other cyclists, you can meet other cyclists online. It's great from a community perspective as well. Part 1, your bike. First of all, I'd really recommend working with what you've got. So if you've got a bike in the shed, get it out, have a look over it. If you're not confident that you can verify whether it is roadworthy, definitely get it checked out by your local bike shop. And yeah, take a look at what you've got, because the kind of bike that you have will dictate the kind of riding that you can do. So if you've got a road bike, you'll need to be sticking to roads. If you've got a hybrid, a cyclocross or a gravel bike, that will enable you to get out onto tracks and trails a bit more. If you've got a mountain bike, obviously you can go onto bigger, wider terrain. I've also seen people touring with fat bikes. Serious respect. It looks like very hard work, but it is definitely doable. I started touring on a commuter, like hybrid style bike. So like bridleways, country lanes, and cutting across the old field. But these days I prefer a cross-country style mountain bike, just for getting off-road a little bit more. I've also loaded up a road bike before to tour around Scotland. Google Maps does not know which roads are cobbled and which roads aren't. So that was very bumpy and uncomfortable, but at the same time, very fun. So there you go, work with what you've got. If you're looking to buy a bike, The same principles apply. And if money really is no object, there are companies out there that will sell you road and off-road touring specific bikes. You don't need a touring bike to go bike touring, but there are benefits. Largely, you can get more on the bike because they're designed for touring. So you could, they might have like a longer crossbar. They might be made of a certain material that makes them lighter weight or more rugged. I don't own one, but I hear Surly make very, very good bikes. And if you've read Anna McNuff's book about cycle touring, she has a Surly pink bike called Buka. I also hear that Alpkit Sonder bikes are very, very good. And I'll get onto Alpkit later. They make great kit. So it would be good to have a bike that we'd be able to put that on. But besides that, you don't need a specific cycle touring bike to go cycle touring. Part 2, planning a route. So once you've got a bike that you're comfortable with and you're ready to start planning your route, the first piece of advice I'd give you is to start small and start local. Although bikepacking is a great way to go to really far-flung places like New Zealand, by starting local you can sort of work out like the kinks in your setup or your rig, so that if things do go wrong, you've got a backup plan essentially. You've maybe got people who can come pick you up, or you know how to get home. Because even when you've planned, things can still, you can have hiccups for certain, and it's better to be closer to home. So start thinking about where, for example, you might be able to cycle in a day from your home. I'd recommend getting out an Ordnance Survey map and just having a look. There might be like a big area that you've never explored, or there might be a strange historical feature that you've never encountered, that you know is in your vicinity, and you can start planning a route to get there. It's extremely satisfying to be able to just cycle out the door and cycle home. But that might not be possible for you. If it isn't, there are other ways. You can get out on the train, for example. Be aware that a lot of train companies expect you to book a ticket for your bike as well. It's usually free, but it's essential on a lot of services, so just make sure you've planned in advance enough to be able to do that. You can also take your bike on a coach. Some coach services, not all coach services, but a lot of coach services will take a packed bike. That usually means you have to put it in a bag or a box. Bike touring, that can be a bit of a problem, because then what do you do with it? So you might need to work out a way for a friend to look after it wherever you're going, or you might get like a cardboard box from a bike shop, but then you've got to also bear in mind you'll need one on the way home as well. So it's a little logistically fraught, but it is possible to get out on a bus as well as a train. In terms of planning your route, you'll be looking at the kind of miles and kilometres that you'll be doing each day, and that will be very much dependent on the kind of cyclist that you already are. Just remember that even if you can cycle 100 kilometres on a road bike on a good day, cycling a fully loaded bike is quite different, and you'll want to kind of reduce the amount of miles that you can cycle potentially in order to kind of make up for that. Nothing can really prepare you for that feeling when you're looking up at a big hill thinking, oh gosh, if I only didn't have all this kit on my bike I'd be able to speed up that. But not so easy on a loaded bike, so do bear that in mind when you're planning how many miles you can be doing on a route a day. I'd really recommend once you have some kit, loading up your bike and giving it a test ride before you head out. That way you can get over the shock before you head out on your trip. When you're looking at places to go, again, looking at that map that you've got out in front of you, if you're going off-road you can be looking for bridleways, and if you're heading for roads, check out like B roads and like more scenic routes. If you do have to take any highways, it's a good idea to check if there's a hard shoulder. First of all, check that it's legal to do so, but then check for a hard shoulder. A good way of doing this is to go on Google Maps and look at Google Street View, and then you can see if the road is viable, and try and limit the amount of riding you do on those kind of fast roads. Things that you want, other things you want to look for on the map include pubs for stopping for food and refreshments, food shops for obviously the same reason, bike shops essentially. If anything goes wrong, it's a really good idea to know where your nearest bike shop is if you need to hop in a taxi or get a lift somewhere to pick up something that you urgently need to fix your bike. It's also a good idea. Oh, and do check their opening times as well, because I know I've been in a fix where, on a Sunday, I got a snap chain in the middle of Devon, and the only way out of that situation was to rely on the kindness of strangers, because there were no bike shops in the vicinity, and yes, it worked out. But do know where your bike shops are for when you need them. It's also a good idea to work out any accommodation that's nearby in case the weather turns nasty or you've just had enough, or potentially your tent falls off your bike. Stranger things have happened. I've lost shoes off bikes before. I've lost many things. I've never lost a tent yet, but it could happen. So staying on course is another thing you obviously want to do when you've planned a route. I use a Garmin now, a little Garmin. With like you can set a GPX file and download it to follow it, but I would also, and you can also use like a navigation app on your phone, create a GPX file, something like View Ranger, or the Adventure Queens will have loads of other ideas for different ways to look at GPX files, but it is always a good idea to have a paper map as well. Or if you're like going between maps, like draw your own, just with the essentials marked on, like roads and features. And it's always a good idea to know not only where you're going to, but where you're going through, in case you do end up going off course, and you need to know kind of the nearest place you're trying to get back to. So yeah, that's a really good idea for if you find yourself veering off course. Part 3, packing. Once you've got a bike and you know sort of roughly the kind of trip you're going to go on, it's time to start packing that bike out. There are so many infinite possibilities for putting things on a bike. I'm just going to talk you through what I've done and the essentials, but it's absolutely limitless, so just bear that in mind. And all bikes will look different, and all kits and setups will look different. Essentially, I have a front roll, so I've got things like sleeping equipment, sleeping bag, some clothes and things in the front, keep it nice and light above the wheel. I've then got a back roll. This is slightly more unusual. So what I've done is I've got a pannier rack, but I don't have the traditional pannier bags on it. I've got a roll, which is essentially like this one, but sort of loaded and strapped with my tent on the back. You might want to use traditional pannier bags, which is totally fine. They are heavier, which is one thing I found, and I've also found off-road they tend to make you a little more unsteady, which is why I don't like them. But it's absolutely fine if that's what you've got. I wouldn't recommend rushing out and spending loads and loads of money on them because they are quite expensive. I bought cheaper ones to start with and lined them with bin liners. And I even put my tent in a bin liner the first time I went out. Not really sure why, but I did. So there you go. Bin liners are your friends. Hiking or biking or any such adventure. A lot of people use seat post bags, which will come off the seat post like this. This is a very, very small example, but there are much bigger ones. I think seat post bags are great, but they haven't worked for me in the past because I've got a very low clearance over my rear wheel. And I've got a strange seat post diameter, but that's just me. There are lots of examples of other kinds of seat post bags that you can use. You also want a frame bag potentially, so a bag that can fit in this triangle here. In my experience, these are pretty difficult to find exactly for non-specific touring bikes. If you have got a touring bike, often the company that produced your bike will have very specific bags to fit, which is a huge advantage in terms of storing things on the bike. Today I've just got my water bottle holder in here, and I'm going to come back to water, but it's a very important consideration on the bike. You can also find other little places to squeeze things in. So I know some companies make adapters for the front fork, You can also have little bags like this on the top tube, just for keeping essentials in, like tubes, etc. This would go somewhere like here or here. And you can also get little pouches, and it's worth looking at companies such as Outkit and just seeing what they have, and buying bits and pieces, trying them out, making sure you can send them back if it doesn't fit your bike. Over time you'll just work out what works for you. And the beautiful thing is, you'll never have it perfect. You can talk to people forever about packing your bike, and you'll never have the perfect rig. But that's fine. That's part of the fun. Usually when I see like the perfect bike bag or the perfect setup or something close to it, the individual has made it themselves. So if that's something that appeals to you, by all means, go out and try it. I don't have a sewing machine or any sewing skills. I wish I did. But that is something that works for lots of people. So next, of course, once you've got the bag sorted out, what are you going to put in them? The first thing to consider is hydration, where you're going to keep water. So you might just keep it in conventional things like this. I actually still carry most of my water when I'm riding in a 10-litre little bag that goes on the back. It's not optimal, but it works for me. But essentially you want to be budgeting about 2 to 4 litres a day for water. It obviously varies hugely on the trip that you're doing, whether it's going to be hot, cold, whether you're going to be encountering water stops or not. But that again will come down to the kind of trip that you're doing. Just don't ever skimp on water, and make sure you've got space for it. Essentially, packing other things, it comes down to hiking principles. So keeping it light, sticking to the essentials, and packing for all weathers. Weigh everything, and if you don't need it, leave it at home. I've also heard adventure queens talking a lot about like having little luxuries, and that's definitely something that I practice. I've carried a Kindle and a cuddly wizard in the past, so you know, whatever you need. If you can fit it in, it's good to have. Remember, there are also things you'll need on a bike tour that you won't need on a hike. The first of these that springs to mind is cycling shorts. So they do take up more space than regular shorts, and you'll want to make sure you have a pair a day, or if you don't have a pair a day, that you've got a way of washing them, so that you stay all like comfortable and hygienic. Some people swear they don't need cycling shorts, and good for those people, but I wouldn't be without them. And a good pair of cycling shorts, you need some chamois butter, so like a skin barrier essentially to avoid like chafing and rubbing. Velo Vixen make a really good one, but there are others out there, of course. You'll also need bike tools. So the best bike tools I've ever found is this little kit here, called the Top Peak Survival Gearbox, which is fantastic. It's got nearly everything you need to get you out of a sticky situation, and it costs about £20. You've got all the Allen keys, you've got like a chain link tool in there, you've got like a spanners and bits and pieces. You'll also need a bike lock, and you'll also need space for food. Make sure you don't go hungry by packing so much on your bike that you can't put any food in there. One good way of avoiding that situation is to carry like a little drawstring bag or something that you can like screw up really small, and then carry on your back or strap to the back somewhere on the bike. It's just essential really that you don't go hungry, because if you go hungry you'll be miserable, and you're out to have fun. You're not out to be miserable, you're not out to suffer. So make sure you've got space for food. Don't torture yourself by not bringing enough snacks, and keep snacks within reach as well. Something like this little top tube bag I mentioned earlier is a great place to keep snacks, so you're not having to stop and pull everything off your bike just to get a cereal bar when you're feeling like you need a boost. I hope this has been an interesting overview for you if you're thinking about starting bikepacking. Just to give you a summary, first of all, any bike can be a bikepacking bike so long as it's roadworthy and you've considered the kind of terrain that the bike is suitable for when you're planning your trip. Second of all, if you're new to bikepacking, keep it small, keep it local so you can maximise your enjoyment on the bike and you do have a bigger safety net should anything go wrong. Thirdly, stick to hiking principles when you're packing. Keep it light, keep it essential, and make sure you've got plenty of space for food and water so that you are not caught out. there's so much more we could cover, but I'm going to hand it over to you and your questions, which I really look forward to reading. Thanks for watching.